So wait a minute, should we start the conversation again now, and then we can just connect that to the beginning, and then the podcast will be fully secular?
What? So I mean, I say, hey,
Glenn, what topics have we got to choose from tonight? I know you texted me a couple of things.
I've got this thing says game, puzzle, or process. I've made a series of notes about. We could just start talking about it. I mean, what I mean is, as an example, there's the game The Mind or Micro Macro. They often get attacked as being more process than game, and I'd like to talk about what's meant by that.
Yeah, all right. I got taken to task over a very brief miniatures game that I was quite cross about because it was just basically a bunch of name generators. But apparently that's okay. So yeah, maybe we can talk about things that just drive themselves. All right.
Right.
Shall I hit record?
I don't know what we're gonna do. We'll intro this episode. I will at some point cut this and put it at the start of this conversation, and I'm going to leave the intro in and just let it run through on the full video. So, hi, and welcome to Rule of Carnage. This is a video series where myself, Glenn Ford, a games designer and developer, and this guy, Mike Hutchinson, who is also a games design developer, have conversations about making better miniatures games. The conversation we're having today is a rambling philosophical jaunt into the idea that there are games and there are processes, and that there is some sort of difference between the two. As I was saying to Mike earlier, one of the things that kicked this idea off in my head is that I was playing the Spiel des Jahres winner of this year, Micro Macro, and I posted a picture of it at Christmas up online, and somebody said, yeah, it's really good, but it's more of a process than a game. And the question is sort of, what did they mean by that? What's the difference between, because Micro Macro is very clearly a game. You sit down and you have fun with some friends. It exists within the gamic circle. It's certainly not work. It's certainly entertainment. It has rules and it has a thing that you go through. But I understand what that person meant by that. I understand that they meant what they said was meaningful. It wasn't just gibberish. And so when is a game a game? When is a game a process? When is it a puzzle? How does that relate to tabletop miniatures games, which is what we've already been talking about for a solid 20 minutes. And we'll possibly try to come to some conclusions in the next sort of 10 to 15 minutes.
Quick, cut backwards. So what's on the menu?
So we can have a chat about this thing of what is when is a game not a game, what is a process, what is a puzzle, why do some people say that some games aren't games when they so plainly are, and is it problematic? And
it also comes a little bit out of the sort of lack of control, uncertain command thing, because I was chatting to Sean Sutter earlier, and he was sort of saying, I quite like a game where the story unfolds itself and I don't necessarily have control of everything, and they don't follow my orders necessarily. And to a degree, that's a sort of similar thing. It's like, it's the enjoyment of operating the machinery to see what happens, rather than saying, all right, it's chess, I have total command.
No, absolutely. And yeah, and it's a question of, okay, well, when is it that what you're doing is you are having an emergent narrative unfold, and you're enjoying being a passenger on the roller coaster of that narrative. And that's one of the types of maybe non-game games. Equally, though, there is that whole thing of, like, Clock Patience is definitely, it's a game, right? There's no narrative that's unfolding, but there's no skill to playing it. You will either resolve out or it won't. That's preset by the deck. It is just a process, and there are more complicated and interesting games that are essentially just a process that you go through for some reason, aside from winning, testing your skill, or enjoying a narrative. And what is that quality? is it something to be worried about if it turns up? You know, just I think it might be a bit of a philosophical thing of talking about some of these things, wondering where they turn up in
It
games.
reminds me of Waiting for Godot, where one of the characters said, "Well, that passed the time," and the other one said, "Well, it would have passed anyway." Yes, but not so rapidly.
Yes, and I think it's significant because, like I say, I know it's a board game thing, but you know, like recently I posted about playing Micro Macro, this year's SDJ winner over Christmas. And one of the first comments that somebody gave in response was, yeah, but it's not really a game, it's a process. And it's like, well, it just won the most prestigious award in the world for games. It's game-like. What do you mean when you say it's not really a game? And the mind was this huge thing, and it's, you know, there are threads on Board Game Geek that go on endlessly about, but is the mind a game? And what do people mean when they say this game isn't a game?
So how do we relate that to miniature games and not get dragged into a sort of BGG debate on this? I suppose it's somewhere in between that. Like, I think it's a lot about player motivation. It's like, what am I looking for from the game experience? What am I looking for from this tabletop experience? Is it you and me going head to head and I will win, or you will win? Or is it some interlocking puzzle? Or is it some just like, let's see what happens?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, I think possibly it's about talking about, because, so for example, again, there's this game Time Stories I mentioned before. Basically, you can't not win. Eventually you will win the game, but it has this quite intricate narrative, and you play through the narrative. It's a bit like a choose your own adventure, and I get going through that because I don't know what the narrative is before I start playing it.
So it's like watching a movie.
Yeah, but when we talk about, you know, okay, unfolding the narrative of a tabletop miniatures game, I know what the narrative, I've read all the tables in the book. I've read the rule book before I start playing. I know all the possibilities in all of the rule book on all the tables are before I roll dice one. There's no way that I'm going to go, you know, oh, I wonder what's coming. I know exactly what's coming next. I just don't know which of the things are coming next. And I personally don't find it particularly delightful to discover that it's the fifth result on the table rather than the sixth result that's coming next. That's not.
But that is disingenuous to what actually happens in play, which is, although I can flip my car, like I flipped my car and then I rammed into you and then something happened, or like,
yeah,
it was the last guy that managed to get the critical hit. So any one of the 20 tanks that just got destroyed could have planted that final shot on the giant robot, but it was that one, and that was only permitted because of the mechanics of the system, but it wasn't guaranteed.
Exactly, and I think you're 100% correct. And I think if there's a point to this conversation, it's a point about the narrative process, the unfolding of the story within the game. I don't think can just come from a set of flavor text written out and then ordered into tables, and then you roll some dice and you find out that a set of those, like Mad Libs or something, where a set of the sentences have been jammed into an order, and now that's a narrative. It's like, no, it's fucking not. It's a series of random sentences jammed into a random order. That's not a narrative. What's a narrative is that I try to do a certain thing and I have reasonable expectations of it coming off. And then because you did a certain thing, you cleverly out. And I was like, oh, I thought I was going to do that, but he was too clever for me. And then I didn't do that. And then this other thing happened. But because that thing happened, I was able to do this other. That's how I think you build an emergent narrative on the tabletop. And I think it's partly the point is of saying is that even if you're looking for a play to find out what would be a process game in a tabletop game design, I think, is my opinion, that you still need to give people that the things that are possibly gamic, or are the things that people are saying that, you know, Micro Macro isn't a game about, and sort of maybe saying, okay, well, what do people mean by saying that Micro Macro isn't a game? And what does it mean if they can say the same thing about your tabletop miniatures game? is that problematic? Where is it problematic? Why is it problematic? What does it create if it doesn't?
Does Micro Macro have a winner?
It's a co-op game. Well, basically, what Micro Macro is.
Oh, that makes it even more complicated. It's a co-op game, so so.
And again, you can't really lose it. What it is it's a massive map. But it's like incredibly well, it's not a map, it's a picture of a city that's incredibly detailed, full of little cartoon characters. And you get a card that says Mr. Rabbit has been murdered. He's near the petrol station in the southwest corner. You know, how did he die? And you find Mr. Rabbit and you see that he's got a knife in his back. Oh, he was stabbed to death. So where was he stabbed to death is the next card. And then you've got to track it back, like, oh, there he is, walking along, and there he is doing.
So the question is that a puzzle or is that a toy? It's maybe not a toy, but it's definitely that smells like a puzzle.
Yeah, it does feel like a puzzle, but then it's like, well, when you're playing a puzzle, I mean, they're all puzzles, you know what I mean? It's like a given turn of any worker placement game is a maximization puzzle. There's a right answer. I've got to figure
I guess like when I bumped into this when trying to write solo scenarios for a couple of games, but like writing a puzzle for a war game situation is a bit like writing a chess puzzle. It's like there's a setup, there might be an escape. Can you find your way out of this situation? That's sort of like Perilous Tales kind of is that, but just procedurally generated.
What I think personally is that there are game puzzles and process puzzles. Oh. What my opinion is
by the way, I think we're just recording this episode at this point. Like, I don't think we're going back over this ground. Apart from one F-bomb, I think this is good.
I'm gonna find some way to edit this back in. What I think is that when somebody says that something isn't a game, but that it is instead a process, what they're referring to is the presence of learnable skills and heuristics in relation to that game. That's my opinion. So, for example, the Mind, as I say, was one of these big games. So, what the Mind is, if you don't know,
I don't know.
It's a co-op game. Everyone's got some cards that are numbered from 1 to 100. Without speaking or communicating in any way, you've got to take turns. You don't take turns, actually. You play your cards face up. You all have to play out all of your cards in order amongst all of you. That's the whole game.
Ah, right. Yeah, okay. That sounds extremely jolly, and much hilarity ensues, presumably.
But the thing of it is, and I think that what gets into people, annoys the people annoyed by it is that there's only realistically one possible strategy. And there are no skills or heuristics that you can learn to get better at that game.
Got it.
And if you dare voice the one strategy, the game is totally ruined. And what the game relies on is everyone unspeakingly naturally finding themselves. So the one strategy
just sort of deliberately playing slightly sort of playing slightly foolishly in order to extenuate the fun of it.
Well, the thing of it is so if you play that game near a loudly ticking clock and you count along with the ticks and you play your card as the number of your card comes to the count.
Spoilers!
You will always you will get to the highest level. The game can't touch you. The fun of the game is not consciously counting, but naturally falling into the same rhythm. Because the only strategy is to wait until roughly 70 beats before playing the number 70. That's all there is to the game. And trying to figure out what counts as a beat for the other players as opposed to you. And the fun of the game is all of you falling into the same rhythm and it feeling like it's like fucking telepathy.
I mean, it sounds a lot like jamming in a band. It's just you just don't have to learn an instrument to be able to jam in Mind.
Yeah, and it is just and so the quality of it is that you unspeakingly fall into the same rhythm as the other people around the table, and without talking about it and without trying, you suddenly all play as a single mind, and you get all the cards out even at the highest level, and it feels like witchcraft, where it isn't. You've just all started counting to the same beat unconsciously in your head.
You're just
You
dancing to a drum.
If you just flicked a metronome next to the group at the start of the game, you would have done that on like turn one of the game. And my feeling is that the thing about that rubs people up the wrong way, as I say, is that there's no skill to learn. There's no strategy. There's no set of heuristics. I can't figure out, I need to get the worker, the extra worker, or I need to hit him in the flank, or I need to, maneuver in this way. And similarly in micro macro, there's no skills or heuristics you can learn to get better at micro macro. You have to find a little dude on a map, and then you have to follow his path back around the map. Lots of puzzles, crosswords are a perfect example.
Yeah,
Crosswords
they require a lot of
filled with heuristics and skills. You can learn to be better at crosswords in a way that you can't learn to be better at the mind, not consciously. And it's my opinion that crosswords are game-like, and if we're saying it's game or process, I suspect that crosswords are like games and micro macro is like a process. And I'm not sure. I don't think there's a problem being either of those two.
I mean, I guess
think that's what rubs people up wrong about
the semantics that bother me about that statement. Although I totally understand it, and I see where you're coming from. Like, for me, it feels like a process could be something that is a mechanical skill, which I suppose the mind is in a way. Like, if my job is to stamp little rubber things onto envelopes as they go past, like, I can get faster and more accurate and more reliable at that. Or like, if I'm practicing returning tennis balls from a machine, like, is that gamic? Maybe it is, but like things that are like repetitive processes, I could potentially get more rehearsed with, and therefore.
But the thing about about the mind that's so interesting is that if you consciously try to get better at the mind, you ruin it. It's done. The game is over. If you consciously think, well, the only way to get better at this game is to count as soon as the round starts, the game's dead. You've just shot it through the head. You can learn to get better at tennis and snooker, and you can consciously learn to get better at tennis and snooker. If you consciously try and get better at the mind, and it's why I think micro macro is actually kind of a better game, because you can try your best to get better at micro macro, you just can't get any better at it. It's sort of it is what it is.
I haven't wazzed on about this on this podcast yet, but I was explaining to you my sort of rough imagining of like tabletop miniature games and what their loop is. And like, for me, like, thinking about the game, like reading the rule book, thinking about your army list, blah blah blah, like, doing a bit of online shopping, like that's step one, which naturally leads into step two, which is quite unusual for most games, which is the physical preparation. So I can't actually come and play a game with you until one or both of us has stuck some models together and painted them and built some terrain and figured out what the board is and all that. And then there's the playing of the game, the actual like going through the game itself. And then the bit that connects it back to the beginning is the like thinking about and analyzing what happened, so that I can tweak my list, or I can think about a different tactic, or I can decide I don't like this game and I want to play something different. And like that leads naturally back to the sort of mental preparation back to the game. And I think if you took away that last part, we would finish the game and the loop would be broken. And maybe an external trigger would tell us, oh yeah, I'd quite like to play another game of something, so let's just restart from like zero on that. But unless there is a learning loop, a desire to get better, a desire to explore more, then I don't think it functions at its highest as a tabletop miniature game.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think this is the thing, because at the moment we're both, for various reasons, I'm reading a hell of a lot of sets of war games rules.
I'm reading a hell of a lot of 60s classic wargaming texts.
Yeah, well, I've gone onto Wargame Vault, and I've downloaded everything that's free to download, and I'm just working my way through.
I love your quality control. It's like, I will only read things that are free.
I'll start with all the free ones, and then and then I'll move my way up. But I mean, I think that there's something valid about reading. I mean, first of all, there's some amazing stuff on there. Like Freebooter's Fate is free. There's like proper full-on, rule systems that are free just because they're a couple of editions old. And second of all,
they
I
make
think,
their money off the minis and wanting to go and buy some. The
yeah,
freebies minis are really cool, actually.
yeah. And and also I think it's entirely valid to, just because someone's a hobbyist and they've stuck it up, pay what you want with a suggested price of $0, they can have perfectly valid viewpoints. And my point is, I've read quite a few rule sets over the last few weeks that I don't think that there's any way of getting better at those games. I don't think you could play the game, go through the processes, based on, some fairly close examinations to some of them. And it's like, well, what happens is you put a team on the table, you run them around, some things happen, some things that are very, very narrative and have lots of like descriptive text attached to them and are cool. And, the mermaid of Gribbledoom popped out of the cauldron and gave you the sword of Singwanger because you rolled these numbers. It's like, well, yeah, but I couldn't get better at rolling those numbers. I couldn't, I'll do the exact same thing, and I'll either become the best player because I got the singiest song sword, or I'll be the worst player because I got a potato with a maggot in it. And I can't get better at that. And this game doesn't intend me to get better at it. This game intends me to go through and have a lot of text thrown at me by a random generation process that is connected to shoving physical things around a table. And so it is a gamified random text generation process.
Yeah.
But I can't learn skills and heuristics to get better at that game. I could want to play it.
An interesting place to spin off from that then is, I think, to drag it back to movies briefly, because like I watched the most recent Dune movie recently, and I'm probably going to watch it again. It wasn't the best, but I'm probably going to watch it again. I'm not going to get any better at watching that movie. I was going to say I watched like Ant-Man the other day, and I'm not going to get any better at watching Marvel movies, but weirdly you do get better at watching Marvel movies. There's something odd there. I was very bad at watching them initially. So I think like there is a place, whether or not it's a game, but there is a place for a tabletop entertainment experience that sort of rumbles out and doesn't necessarily ask very much of you. I particularly look for this in a solo experience. So I was reading a rule book the other day, and I had some miniatures laid out on the table, and it was late. I was tired, and like a deep part of me just wanted to push these tiny 6mm tanks around and go pew pew pew, but I didn't quite have a thing that was just going to provide for me an entertainment experience, which was very lean back and sort of like, hey, you roll some dice and some tanks go over here and some tanks go over here. This happened to me as I'm writing some solo rules for Hobgoblin, and I started playing one half and against the robotic opponent. And after the first turn, I was just like, do you know what? Let's just play him against himself. And both sides were automated, and I had a hooting good time just because I didn't have to think about it. I could just sit there drinking a whiskey, moving some figures around and rolling some dice to find out what happened. But every decision in that game was made by the roll of the dice, and that's not a game so much as just was just me putting my feet up. It's not invalid. As a tabletop experience, it's not invalid.
The thing is, for me, and this is an entirely personal taste thing, is that I've got a whole shelf of fighting fantasy books up there. They're very low investment, and they're a process. You can't really get any better at them particularly, and they take you through an entertaining narrative.
I mean, I guess you can maybe draw a map and get more confident at bothering to do that.
Yeah, but that's not an actual skill. It's careful note taking.
That is a skill.
But
ask any undergraduate.
The point is that inherently miniatures tabletop games require a fairly gargantuan amount of investment. And for me personally, I've got like literally 200 games sat just over in the corner in this room, and a lot of them are solo games, and a lot of the solo games are basically little narrative processes, and they come in a box this big and they fit in an area this big, and they were pretty cheap, and I didn't require me to paint stuff and glue stuff together. And if I want to not engage too heavily with something, I'll just get one of those out. It's like, well,
No,
I didn't want to
I
engage
get it. I get it.
heavily
I
with
get it. I get
something,
it. And
so
like,
I spent £100 on miniatures, glued them together, and painted them. And that way, I didn't have to really engage too heavily with the process. You know, it's.
But I think you're absolutely right to say that's a personal thing, because that's your bias of interest coming through. Like, you know, here in front of me here, I've got some, you know, some gorgeous like 80s Realm of Chaos champions, and these guys sit here winking at me because like I've enjoyed collecting them, finding them. I enjoyed sticking them on bases. I enjoyed painting them, and now they come out and they play solo games because I want to see those guys just on the table. I want to enjoy them. Like, it's almost like, for me, the sort of thinking about it and physical preparation is that's the 80%. I enjoy the gaming a lot, and I'm probably less excited about the analyzing part. Like, I don't necessarily play to win here. I play to enjoy the experience, and I don't necessarily do the analysis because I'm not very good at winning. So I've given up sort of focusing on that part. So for me, like, the idea of having, you know, 100 solo games behind me, like, if the itch that I need to scratch is getting a little 80s Chaos Warrior out and seeing him batter a Kev Adams orc over their head, like, I don't really care what process or game delivers that experience, but that's what needs to happen in order to scratch that itch.
I don't know what we're gonna do. We'll intro this episode. I will at some point cut this and put it at the start of this conversation, and I'm going to leave the intro in and just let it run through on a full video. So, hi, and welcome to Rule of Carnage. This is a video series where myself, Glenn Ford, a games designer and developer, and this guy, Mike Hutchinson, who is also a games design developer, have conversations about making better miniatures games. The conversation we're having today is a rambling philosophical jaunt into the idea that there are games and there are processes, and that there is some sort of difference between the two. As I was saying to Mike earlier, one of the things that kicked this idea off in my head is that I was playing the Spiel des Jahres winner of this year, Micro Macro, and I posted a picture of it at Christmas up online, and somebody said, yeah, it's really good, but it's more of a process than a game. And the question is sort of, what did they mean by that? What's the difference between, because Micro Macro is very clearly a game. You sit down and you have fun with some friends. It exists within the gamic circle. It's certainly not work. It's certainly entertainment. It has rules and it has a thing that you go through. But I understand what that person meant by that. I understand that they meant what they said was meaningful. It wasn't just gibberish. And so when is a game a game? When is a game a process? When is it a puzzle? How does that relate to tabletop miniatures games, which is what we've already been talking about for a solid 20 minutes. And we'll possibly try to come to some conclusions in the next sort of 10 to 15 minutes.
Quick, cut backwards.
Yes, cut backwards, cut forwards. And now for everybody who's caught up with us, yeah, I mean,
so getting back to the design, like, is it, so the answer for you is going to be different to some other people, but like, is it important that you design a game that is absolutely a capital G game, where in your definition it has learnable, improvable skills and heuristics, or is it acceptable to design something that's basically a Marvel movie that sort of unfolds itself? And I guess the point is with every conversation about tabletop games design is like, it depends what your objective is, and it also depends who your like potential, who your target like player is. But I think that like in our experience, we're mostly, you and me are mostly looking for the former.
I mean, my personal opinion on this is that a game that provides sort of strategic engagement and heuristics and skills can be played by not bothering to learn the heuristics and the skills and not engaging with the strategy. And provided that you put in narrative engagement into it, you've done both things. Whereas if
I'm smiling because I'm remembering like that was me at age 14. Like I had no conception about how to correctly play or get better at any of the wonderful tabletop miniature games that I enjoyed, and I have incredibly fond memories of them all regardless, because I went through the process of, you know, pushing the minis around, and they did things, and some of them fell over, and that was just great, and we all had a good time.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, my problem with the games that don't give you really any realistic option to get better or learn anything or beyond a very, very sort of low level is that they're only doing one thing. They cannot satisfy me. Whereas a game, you know, say like Gaslands, which you can play at a very, very high, you know, level of skill, but you can just push, you know, Hot Wheels around the table and flip them and have them blow up and tell a you know, a death ray story. Does both those things. It satisfies. I find it very, very satisfying to play with really hardcore Gaslands players, and also, you know, small children find it incredibly satisfying to have the car flip over and go boom. And it's, you know, you can just do both of them, in my personal opinion. But the point is that in my opinion, the one that, you know, gives you the option for the strategy that you can just choose to ignore does both of them, and the one that doesn't give you the option for the strategy is simply not giving you the option for that ingredient. That's just my opinion.
No, I think that tends to hold water.
And I think also,
and I suppose the question is, if by focusing on the emergent sort of version of that, do you end up pushing your design to a place that's interesting and different and provide something new, or, as you're hypothesizing, do you end up just cooking half of the dish, and you could have delivered the same thing, but in the context of a system that also provides more chunky, learnable, deep stuff?
and I think also, I think a significant part of it for me is that the most important thing to any sort of narrative, any story, whether it's a movie, a book, or whatever, is getting the audience to engage and you know, identify with the characters that are involved in it. And I'm of the opinion that if you put minis on the tabletop and you realize that they're just things you push around and you roll dice, and you can't really direct their futures, it's a disengaging part of the process. I feel like you could get the rule book and you could put the tables out and you could roll the dice and you could get a little, like, you know, chuck together random narrative. You know, well, that was a story that emerged from that one, lovely, and now go do another one. Whereas if you feel like you're invested in doing better with that miniature, investing your skills, Glenn, invest my skills into the miniatures when I move them around on the tabletop. They're representing a bit of me in a way that, if I'm not investing my skills in them, and I don't think that anything I do will save them or kill them, then I'm not investing any part of myself in them. They're just, I'm using a measuring tape and I'm shoving them around a bit, and I'm rolling some dice and some things happened and I laugh or I don't laugh. But I don't have anything like the engagement where I feel like, you know, he died because I made a mistake, you know, his unit got destroyed because of my errors. And I think that it's my opinion that games have a free pass to get people invested in their characters, dramatically speaking, by making you do stuff to make them win. You know, it's like if you were watching a movie and, you know, the lead character would die unless you, I don't know, dunked a basketball, and the movie had two different endings, and then you failed to dunk the basketball and everybody in the movie studio screamed at you for being an incompetent and ruining the movie, you would feel more strongly about that movie, I think, than if you just sat back and watched it. And games have that built in, and to throw that away, I don't know, seems odd to me. But
yeah, no, I get it. I suppose, like, just to play devil's advocate, like there's a goodly amount, and sort of going back to your clock patience example, like no one. So when I play patience, it's to pass time, and do so in a way that isn't particularly demanding but has a sort of mechanical satisfaction in my brain. And in board games, there's a lot of what are, not like disparagingly referred to as filler games, where like the specific point of a filler game is that it takes about no seconds to set up, it takes about 2 minutes to learn max, it takes about 10 to 15 minutes to play, and it's like a little cracker and you didn't have to have much more of it. So I suppose like one potential argument here is isn't there space for more games, more war games that do take 15 minutes and that aren't requiring a massive week-long loop and then a 3-hour play session? And I don't know that that's necessarily related to whether they're a game or a process, but I bet you it's sure as heck easier to get a miniature game to function as a process and fit within that filler slot than it is to provide something that can both fit inside a filler slot and provide 6 years of deep heuristic improvement.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, the thing is that I've played like 2-hour-long Euro games that were just a process, that there was no real demand put on anybody's thinking at any point, and you went
a
through...
gentle listener, that made him cross.
And you went through.
You actually can't speak with rage. It's the remembrance is overtaking you.
The thing is, there are, I would say, a surprisingly high number of 2-hour-long Euro games which are a set of non-decisions where things roll up to you and you pay the resources on the obvious thing and you do the obvious thing and it trucks out and everyone scores roughly the same points and one person comes out slightly ahead, and people love them, and they are, to me, just totally just processes. There was no real point to doing it. They don't even have like a narrative edge to them. Whereas I think that there are plenty of very short, simple games that are very in depth and engaging, and so I think that making something, I'm pretty certain that you could make a 2-model miniatures war game that takes 15 minutes to play through, and it's incredibly intricate and crunchy and detailed and full of skills and abilities and thinking and learning. And I'm pretty sure that you could, if anything, in my experience, the war games that are very, very sort of processy and story generation-y tend to take way longer. They tend to be games that take a long time, because the people playing them really don't mind. It's not taxing them mentally anyway, and they kind of want to just have the story ramble on because it is a sort of a never-ending story from them anyway. There's no upside to the story ending. I'd like it to just keep going, please, thank you very much. So, and also because they tend to involve like nested tables and random generation of story points, they tend to be very rule book intensive, and so because of that can be very long, sort of long-winded games.
That's probably that makes me want to have a separate conversation at some point about whether a miniature game with only one miniature aside can be interesting. But yeah,
I mean,
I don't know. Did we get anywhere on this? I think we at least we understand what we mean by the Well, you have provided us with the definition of what you mean by a game versus a process, and managed to fit a puzzle like a crossword into the game structure, and then hypothesize that if you're going to build an engine, if you're going to design a game, you should consider designing it with the learnable game mechanics in, because you can always dial it back to provide a sort of lean back entertainment experience. I mean, saying that out loud, like the experience of designing A Billion Suns perhaps tells me that if you do truly want to deliver both the lean forward and the lean back, you probably do need to be sensitive to that as a goal in your design, because it's easy to it's possible to build it so lean forward that it's difficult to pull back again.
Yes. I think that
In the shower the other day, I was thinking, wouldn't it be nice if there was a version of A Billion Suns that said, you know what, there are only 3 ship classes and there is only 1 contract, and you are allowed to just have an okay time and just be chill about it. Like the sort of, I imagine there's maybe a contract set brewing in my mind, which is like the sort of training simulator contract set, which sets these sort of like, do you know what, it's actually just like super easy mode, and you could maybe bolt that together with the solo rules, and it would be something where I can either watch Ant-Man or I can push the training sim of ABS around and have about the same amount of mental taxation.
I think there is a version of ABS which is that, and I think it's just social contract based. It's one where you throw out the resource tracker, and you just go, okay, here's 3 contracts that are telling stories. You're allowed to put down whatever you want, but play by rule of cool rather than winning. And then we can go, oh well, this is the destroyers coming in, and there's the little starfighter going. ABS can totally do that.
Yeah, I mean that's essentially playing with dolls at that point.
Yeah,
which is fine.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's nothing, as I say, there's nothing wrong with that sort of thing.
No, but is that providing sufficient framework? That goes back to the sort of like, don't put upon me the chore of inventing the fun. Like, lead me to the fun and show me where it is. And I think somewhere between playing with dolls and full fat A Billion Suns, as an example of a complicated game, there's maybe some sweet spot, which is like the process. There's enough process there to like pull you off the start line and into the first chapter and to sort of guide you forward, but it's not asking that much of you. Anyway, I don't know if this is a design challenge or of any use to designers, but there it is. Is it a game?
Yeah, well, I think this. Yeah, I think to try and put this into, and I think that thinking about these sorts of things are worthwhile and valuable as a games designer. I definitely do, and I think to try and phrase this in a way that people can maybe go away with and sort of put into their own designs a little bit is, consider when you've put narrative into your game, when you've put in an event that is meant to tell a story, consider why it was triggered, where it came from, and how it's going to affect the players psychologically, whether it was visited upon them by virtue of the game being a process that they go through, or whether it came from their decisions and their choices and their understanding of the game engine that they're engaging with, and that they can say they made that happen. That was something that they created. And consider that there's more value possibly to a narrative that somebody has chosen to create rather than one that you've chosen to drop on them. Consider that they can choose to disengage from the game and just allow it to happen to them. They have that option, but they don't have the option to engage with it if you don't give them the tools and the means to choose to opt into that narrative. Like I said, I think that was always going to be a bit of a philosophical games designy conversation rather than a nuts and bolts write this rule this way or that way or be damned. But I think we've had a couple of quite nuts and boltsy ones.
I'm now off to write a 2 miniature wizard duel, which is just a conversation between 2 wizards, and it's an extensive narrative tree of conversation options, and there's no fighting.
I mean, I can't imagine how that's a miniatures game. If you can make it legitimately and justifiably a miniatures game, I would definitely play that.
Because you can only make quips based on the part of the wizard's outfit that you can see.
Oh, so it's like a 50 mil,
Oh no, yeah, no, it's like meter tall wizards. You play it on your
and as you're talking, you walk back and forth around the room that you're in, and so
in fact, it's a live
my curly slippers. I'd best dodge behind that table, otherwise he's going to say that my toes are weirdly shaped. Yeah, no, definitely right that. Okay, so Rambly and philosophical this conversation was. I hope that if you're watching to this point, you've enjoyed some part of it. If you have, like and subscribe. If you haven't, or if you have, certainly if you have opinions about where that line between game and puzzle and process come out, opinions about games that are more one thing or the other, if you have a personal preference, if you're a big fan of games that send you through a series of tables and chuck out a narrative at the end of it. And I know there are big fans of those things out there. Jump into the comment section and take me to task. I'm not, right about everything by any stretch of the imagination. Either way, look us all up on social media. And for now, I think we're going to sign off on this episode of Rule of Carnage. So thank you and goodbye.
Bye.
I mean, that was a conversation about tabletop miniature games and games design generally.
Well, that's lucky because that's the purpose of this podcast.
Mm.
So wait a minute, should we start the conversation again now, and then we can just connect that to the beginning, and then the podcast will be fully secular?
What? So I mean, I say,
hey, Glenn, what topics have we got to choose from tonight? I know you texted me a couple of things.
I've got this thing says game, puzzle, or process. I've made a series of notes about. We could just start talking about it. I mean, what I mean is, as an example, there's the game The Mind or Micro Macro. They often get attacked as being more process than game, and I'd like to talk about what's meant by that.
Yeah, all right. I got taken to task over a very brief miniatures game that I was quite cross about because it was just basically a bunch of name generators, but apparently that's okay. So yeah, maybe we can talk about things that just drive themselves. All right.
Right.
Shall I hit record?
May as well at some point.